Direct-to-home satellite broadcasting is not a new idea. Mathematician and science fiction author Arthur C. Clarke first proposed the use of satellites for the broadcasting of radio and TV signals way back in 1945. A central part of his discovery was the use of a unique orbit located some 22,000 miles above the Earth's equator. Mr. Clarke wrote of his revolutionary idea in an article entitled Extraterrestrial Relays. A body in such an orbit, he said, would revolve with the Earth and would thus be stationary above the same spot on the planet. It would remain fixed in the sky of a whole hemisphere. Today, all communication satellites use this principle. On the 20th anniversary of Arthur C. Clarke's discovery, NASA launched Early Bird, the world's first geostationary communications satellite. Early Bird had the capacity to transmit 240 voice circuits or a single channel of black and white television. Soon after, Early Bird was followed by other international satellites, for the first time creating a global satellite network. At first, satellite operators had to use extremely large antennas, typically 40 to 120 feet in diameter, to receive these international satellite signals. Back then, only national governments, broadcasters, and a few other groups could afford the large cost of installing and operating these mammoth Earth stations. It wasn't until 1975 that the first private individual attempted to receive satellite television via a backyard dish. At that time, India was using an experimental NASA satellite to transmit television programs to remote Indian villages. A young BBC transmitter manager learned that the satellite was beaming signals not only over the Indian subcontinent, but also to locations as far away as England. In December of 1975, Steve Birkill used a 5-foot dish made of window screen to receive his first satellite TV signals. What's more, he built the electronic circuitry for the receiver on his kitchen table. His pioneering efforts proved that individuals with modest resources could bring satellite TV signals into their homes.
After maybe 3 months of experimentation and not knowing what time the transmissions were or exactly being able to locate precisely the satellite location, I found a signal. There it was. It was the AIR, All India Radio crest on the screen, a test card and some program material. That was the first satellite TV that I'd ever seen, and I was absolutely knocked out. You could just about make it out in amongst the noise. So that I was really bitten by the bug then, and that led me on to figure that maybe if I can receive UHF from a satellite that's beaming at India, maybe I should have a go at some of this wonderful microwave stuff like 4 gigahertz and so on.
Following the successful launch of the first U.S. domestic satellites in 1974 and 1975, Home Box Office became interested in using communication satellites to send programming to cable TV systems throughout the country.
I called a meeting with HBO and with RCA, Americom, and with at that time Monty Rifkin, who headed up ATC, December of '74, Time Inc. headquarters, and said, "Hey, I think we ought to move. I think we can price our stations 10 meters at I don't know what we said then, 65,000, I think we said then, which was dramatic. They come from 250 to 100 to 65. We didn't know how to build them at 65, but we figured if we could get some volume going, we'd come down the learning curve. And sure enough, in the spring of '75, HBO agreed to lease some transponders from RCA, and in the September '75, it went on the air with a thriller from Manila, and we installed the first 10-meter TVROs in Jackson, Mississippi, and in Florida, I believe, Fort Pierce.
HBO made its first satellite TV broadcast on September 30th, 1975, when it broadcast the Thrilla in Manila, the championship boxing match between Joe Frazier and Muhammad Ali. Soon thereafter, HBO began making regular use of satellites for broadcasting programming to their affiliate stations throughout the country. Stanford professor Taylor Howard heard about the early HBO transmissions and decided to build his own private receiving station. In July of 1976, he pointed his dish in the direction of what he thought was the RCA satellite.
Well, I was using satellites for something different. We had a group at Stanford that was using one of the Intelsats to relay weather data from Antarctica to the Jamestown Earth Station in California, and then we took it over telephone lines to Stanford, where we were trying to develop synoptic weather maps of Antarctica. And one of the graduate students involved in that program came to me one day and he said, you know, there's video on one of the satellites out there. I said, what do you mean video? And he said, well, pictures. So he said he was down at Jamestown and saw this. So I went home and I had a 15-foot dish left over from my amateur radio moonbounce days, and I built up a receiver out of test equipment, and lo and behold, there was HBO. And I didn't know what it was, I just knew I had a picture. And I remember the first picture very well because I finally found the satellite in the sky, and at that time there was only one, and there was only one transponder active on it, so it was, with a 15-foot dish, it was pretty hard to find. So I finally found this, and it was this all-red screen. And my pictures weren't very good. I had a home-built low-noise amplifier, and everything else was kind of home-built or thrown together. And on this all-red screen, I could tell there was some lettering. It was white lettering kind of shimmering there. So I sat in a chair just like I am now and back from the screen, and I moved the chair back and forth until I was about the right distance. And finally I was able to read the lettering, and it said, "Attention all Earth stations." And I was hooked. I mean, it was hopeless after that.
Here's another kind of television story now. How far some folks will go to watch their favorite programs. Scott Osborne went to a tiny island a long way from nowhere to bring back this special report.
The next major step in the history of DBS was publicity. Bob Cooper, the P.T. Barnum of the early years of satellite TV, was responsible for introducing millions of Americans to the technology. In October of 1978, he wrote an article for TV Guide, which talked about a satellite receiving system he had installed at his home the year before.
At any rate, the article appeared in TV Guide and got a lot of mail, more than 10,000 pieces of mail in about 10 days. It dribbled in for months thereafter, but the mailman got to know us very well because he'd bring in literally sacks full of mail for the 3 or 4 day period there where it kind of peaked, you know, and then fell off to where he could carry it in his hands. And every letter had the same basic request: where do I get one of these?
Bob decided to write back and let people know that he had put together a booklet that would answer their questions.
So we sent all these letters out, and it wasn't but a week later that we started getting checks for $7.50 coming back. Hundreds, thousands of these checks came back. And suddenly I was in the publishing business, which was totally unexpected.
This booklet gave birth to a new industry composed of self-taught inventors and entrepreneurs rather than engineers and corporate giants. Recognizing that this industry desperately needed technical information, Bob decided to publish a magazine and several technical manuals. These included Coop's Satellite Digest and technical manuals written by experimenters such as Taylor Howard, Oliver Swan, and Robert Coleman.
I figured if Taylor will tell Robert Coleman something he's discovered, then why shouldn't we tell everybody else too? And that's what the early couple of years of Coop's Satellite Digest was. Whatever somebody discovered, good, bad, or indifferent, we published it because it was the spreading of information, and it sped up, I think, the maturing process of the home satellite industry.
Bob also founded a series of trade shows which served as an indispensable training ground for manufacturers, technicians, and sales personnel. The infant industry became so successful that by 1986, more than 1 million American homes had satellite dishes. Suddenly, satellite TV had become a force to be reckoned with.
No, there aren't. Baltimore is pretty big. You got a lot of microwaves, but satellites. Both at the subcommittee and full committee levels of the House of Representatives. During that process, the authors of the bill, Congressman Tozin and Congressman Gore and Congressman Rose, asked the chairman of the subcommittee, Congressman Worth, if he would consider melding these two bills together, getting this very important issue of satellite Earth station legality decided in a positive way for us. Birthday to you, happy birthday to you.
The truth is, last year's bill made you legal, not illegal. It said in effect that consumers of America have a right to view satellite programming from home satellite dishes, and that if and when those who provide pay services are capable of offering it for pay, we're willing to pay for that service, provided it's a fair and reasonable charge.
Well, the activities go on from Washington, D.C. We're live from the mall. It's funny, like 10, Robin. Is this 10 off you anyway?
I'm getting used to it. It's a little like Monty Daily Circus. I hope that everyone who's watching in Colorado will take your cue from Charlie Irvin here. It is very important that all of you in Colorado take 5 minutes to write to Chairman Worth and thank him for announcing that he will hold hearings.
This new industry has created a broad new dimension of strong, independent programming outlets available to all Americans, including those in rural areas who heretofore were unserved by other communications technologies.
You know Taylor Howard.
Yeah, very good to see you. Do I still look like your brother? You look like me. Uh-oh. That's worse. Carl Knopf.
This portion of today's coverage is brought to you by Satellite TV Magazine. Okay, one, push it a little bit, tilt up. Stand by in the studio. We're going to the studio. Stand by 4.
Well, that's very...
Coming to 4. Open the mic. Open the mic. You're on. Great, great.
Very good.
But in Washington today, there was yet another round between the people who send the television programs across the country and those of you who have been receiving those programs on your backyard satellite dishes. Here's ABC's Ann Compton.
In rural America, you got to own a pickup truck, have a gun rack in the back, and a satellite dish in the side of your house.
And rural America is watching as its expensive dishes are being rendered useless as pay TV channels begin to scramble the signals so dish owners can't eavesdrop without paying.
I come 1,600 miles up here to see if we can get this scrambling blocked on TV.
Some angry dish owners from around the country couldn't get into the crowded hearing room where Congress considered a moratorium on scrambling. 20 congressmen were also turned away. One who made it said he was on orders from his mother-in-law back in Clifty Creek, Kentucky.
But for the $2,500 satellite dish she has in her backyard, she could not get the network television stations nor cable television.
6 weeks ago, 2 million satellite dish owners began seeing this scrambled signal on home box office. Decoders to unscramble the picture cost nearly $400 and are often impossible to find. Sure, there are many of the 500 channels from around the globe still available.
We watch the Flintstones in French at home and the news in Russian.
But those who own the American satellites are tired of their programs being pirated.
No one is compensated, no one is paid. Scrambling will solve that problem.
But it creates a new problem for Congress, which says it will now try to find if there's a fair price that dish owners can pay to get back in the system. Ann Compton, ABC News, Capitol Hill.
The last time we did a report on this subject, we got quite a lot of mail from some of you. You may want to write to your congressman. That's our report on World News Tonight. I'm Peter Jennings. Good night.
The difficulty became in last fall, several cable companies, through the lead of one of the cable associations, started a major campaign, advertising campaign, and a public relations campaign that implied that it would take multiple decoders once scrambling took place, that the skies were going to go dark, that it was going to be, you know, that you're basically, the dish was going to be a bird bath. In fact, we have ads that show a dish with a dog taking a bath in it that was put out by a cable company, a major MSO, in fact.
All right. Yeah, we'll make it very brief. I did want to make one comment about your rural constituents. I am in such a rural area that the first failure in my system was caused by a cow biting the coax cable from the antenna in half, and I was unable to get warranty from the manufacturer on that. I'll never understand that. I'd like to move over to Satcom 3 now, which is there are two prime cable television satellites, as the cable industry is fond of pointing out. It's an RCA Satcom 3, which is out over the Pacific Ocean, and a Galaxy satellite, Hughes Communications Satellite G1, which we cannot see here because the building blocks it. For this sort of installation, this antenna you're seeing outside the building, Hal's going to move for you. It's presently looking at a Canadian satellite, Anik D. He's going to move it over more toward the Atlantic Ocean to look at Satcom 2. You can see the antenna moving. That's very typical of antennas for this installation, because there are like 20 different satellites that can be viewed, some 500 channels of satellite television. So it's imperative that satellites be moved. In my testimony, I'll bring out how this is a surprise to many of the planners. We also have another little surprise. There is a Russian satellite that's viewable for most of this country, clear to west of the Mississippi. That Russian satellite is going to come up now with one of their news programs. It's not live because they are not yet programming. This is just a tape. It was done in Iowa. Now, this satellite beams its main programming over toward Moscow, over the North Atlantic with a spot beam. The reason we see part of it is that it comes down upon us. It's meant for Cuba. I call this Russian cultural imperialism, slopping their signal over onto us with their prime news broadcast, which this is.
Здравствуйте, товарищи. Сегодня пятый день работы 27-го съезда Коммунистической партии Советского Союза.